Okay, let's unpack this. AMD just dropped their Q1 2025 earnings, and Wall Street gave it a solid high five, a 6% stock jump initially.
Yeah, that initial pop is always interesting.
But you and I both know that's just the trailer, right? We've got the analyst notes, the actual data here, and we
Yeah,
really want to understand the real story. What are the hidden signals, for investors in all these numbers?
exactly. What's really driving things?
We're looking hard at three key areas today: the high-stakes battle in AI accelerators, AMD's ongoing push for more CPU market share, and, well, the China market situation. Always tricky.
And it's fascinating right off the bat because while those headline numbers, what was it, $7.44 billion revenue, sub-106 EPS, both beats look good.
Yeah, definitely a positive.
They really only scratch the surface.
Yeah.
To get a true feel for what's happening, you need to connect those figures to the underlying drivers and, frankly, the potential roadblocks ahead.
Precisely. At first glance, financials look strong, revenue's up, eating earnings, even the gross margin, 53.7%, held up okay considering that $800 million inventory charge they took.
Which is not insignificant, that charge.
No, definitely not. But when you start breaking down how each part of the business did, that's where it gets more, well, interesting. Data center absolutely smashed it. 57% year-over-year growth, $3.7 billion.
Huge numbers there.
And then the client segment, PCs, laptops, that surprised pretty much everyone with a massive 68% increase.
Yeah, that one raised some eyebrows.
Plus, even with all the China challenges we know about, their AI GPU revenue still managed, apparently, significant double-digit growth.
Which immediately brings up how different analysts are seeing this, right?
Yeah.
There's a real split.
Yeah, definitely saw that. Firms like Loop Capital, Cantor, they basically looked at it and said, better than we feared.
Uh-huh. Especially factoring in that estimated, $700 million revenue hit from China GPU restrictions.
Right. They see AMD kind of navigating some pretty choppy waters surprisingly well.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got the more cautious takes. HSBC, KeyBank, they're flagging potential worries about demand later in the year.
Second half concerns, yeah.
And, of course, the constant pressure from Intel in CPUs. Always there.
Always. So who's got the right read? Probably, somewhere in the middle, which is why we can't just stop at the press release headline.
Exactly. So let's take that client segment growth, that 68%. What really jumps out when you dig a bit deeper into what fueled that?
Okay, this is where it gets really nuanced, I think.
Yeah, here's a really intriguing detail. That huge jump in client revenue wasn't necessarily because everyone suddenly rushed out to buy a new PC.
Right.
While the revenue exploded, the actual number of units they shipped laptops, desktops actually went down, double digits compared to the last quarter.
Ah, okay, so the growth was price-driven.
Almost entirely. Higher average selling prices, ASPs, they specifically pointed to strong demand for their higher-end stuff, Ryzen 9 desktop chips, those new AI-focused Max Plus notebook chips.
So what this tells you, if you're listening, is AMD seems to have strong pricing power in those premium spots. They're selling the expensive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's maybe not evidence of a broad recovery in overall PC demand volume.
Yeah.
That distinction is pretty critical, isn't it,
Yeah.
for thinking about sustainability?
Absolutely critical. If demand for those top-tier chips cools off, they don't have a surge in volume shipment numbers to kind of cushion it.
Right. No safety net there.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears, the real hot topic, AI GPUs. Everyone's watching this space like a hawk. We know about the big Oracle win, right? 30,000 units.
Yeah, that was big news.
But it sounds like AMD's progress here isn't just about that one deal.
That's right. The fact that a, quote, frontier model developer, and they never name names, do they?
Never. Very cloak and dagger.
Is now running a significant chunk of their AI inference workloads on AMD's Instinct GPUs. That's a really encouraging sign. Just adoption is broadening.
Beyond just the one big hyperscaler customer.
Exactly. And then there's the software piece, which is just crucial in AI. The fact that their ROCm platform, that's AMD's answer to NVIDIA's SUDIA, now has native support for over 2 million models on Hugging Face.
2 million, wow.
That's a massive leap in making their hardware more usable for developers.
Yeah.
It's starting to, nibble away at NVIDIA's software dominance.
Even though NVIDIA still has that huge lead in developer mindshare, 99% CUDA.
Oh, absolutely. The key word here is traction. It's not about suddenly overtaking CUDA overnight. That's unrealistic. CUDA has years on it.
Sure.
But it's about showing consistent progress, making it easier for developers already working with these models to actually use AMD hardware. That compatibility is vital.
Okay, now let's pivot to something maybe less flashy, but seems pretty important. AMD's strategy at the rack scale level, integrating into massive data centers. That ZT Systems acquisition seems to be paying off already.
It really looks like it. By actively co-designing these MI400-based systems with the big hyperscalers, way ahead of the expected 2026 rollout.
They're getting in early.
They are.
Yeah.
And they're tackling those tricky integration challenges head-on. Cooling, interconnects. At that massive scale, tiny inefficiencies become huge performance bottlenecks, huge cost issues.
Right, you can't just wing it at that scale.
Definitely not. So AMD getting involved early through ZT Systems potentially gives them a real edge in delivering these complex, large-scale AI setups effectively.
So when we zoom out a bit, this earnings report seems to really back up AMD's core strategy, doesn't it? Focusing on high-performance computing and obviously going hard after that exploding AI acceleration market.
Exactly. And if you connect that back to their more established CPU business, they're still making good progress there too, gaining share in both cloud and traditional enterprise IT.
Yeah, the numbers look good there. Processors in all top 10 cloud providers now, and wins in what, 90% of key industries like auto, finance, energy.
It shows breadth.
But we can't ignore the elephant in the room, can we? The geopolitical angle. Those U.S. export restrictions on advanced AI chips to China, that's got to be a significant headwind.
Oh, it is a major one. AMD is actually projecting a substantial $1.5 billion reduction in revenue for 2025, specifically because of these rules.
$1.5 billion. Ouch.
Yeah. And the biggest impact is expected in Q2 and Q3 of this year. It mainly hits their expected sales of the MI308 AI chip in China, which was, a decent chunk of what they initially thought they'd sell there. Maybe 20–25% of their initial plan for that chip.
And that $1.5 billion hit, analysts are suggesting that could really ding their overall earnings per share for the whole year. That's not trivial.
Not at all. Which brings us to how investors are likely processing all this. Despite these near-term bumps, China ban, maybe some client seasonality,
right.
The broader sort of medium-term investment story for AMD still seems largely intact, wouldn't you say?
It feels that way. So if you're an investor looking at the next, say, 6 to 12 months, what are the absolute key things you need to keep an eye on?
Okay, number one, just continued momentum. Keep watching that CPU market share gain. And critically, the successful ramp-up of the newer AI products, specifically MI350 and MI400.
Execution on those new chips is key.
Absolutely. Second, margins, profit margins. The expectation is they should recover. Normalize back to around 54% the second half of 25, assuming those newer, likely higher margin AI chips scale up properly.
Okay.
And finally, customer diversification. The big cloud guys are vital, sure, but seeing increased adoption from other types of customers like those sovereign AI deals, the G42 one in France, for example, that would be a very positive signal of broader demand.
And what about valuation? How's the market pricing AMD right now?
Well, their current rating multiple, basically price relative to future earnings, is around 17 times their estimated 2026 EPS.
Okay, 17x. How does that compare?
It's noticeably lower than their peer group average, which is closer to like 26 times.
Interesting gap.
It is. So if AMD can really show strong market uptake for the MI350, and if the MI400 shapes up to be a real contender against NVIDIA's next-gen stuff.
Big ifs, but plausible.
And especially if ROCm keeps gaining ground with developers. There's definitely potential for that valuation multiple to expand, to close that gap.
Makes sense. So how does AMD really stack up against the big dogs right now? NVIDIA in AI, Intel in the data center. Let's look at that competitive picture.
Okay, AI first. NVIDIA still has a very, very strong grip, mainly because of CDA. That software ecosystem is just so mature, so widely used.
Developer comfort level is huge there.
It really is, almost default for many.
Yeah.
But like we said, ROCm is showing real, tangible progress. Weekly updates, that Hugging Face integration, supporting key models like Meta's Llama 4, Google's Gemma 3. These are concrete steps.
So progress, but still a big hill to climb on the software side.
Definitely. And then on the hardware itself.
Yeah.
Well, the current MI300 series is getting some traction, finding its feet. But the real test, that's MI350, and especially MI400. AMD's making some pretty bold claims about MI400 performance.
It's a 35x number.
Yeah, that massive 35-fold improvement over MI300 they're talking about for both training and inference at rack scale. That's aiming squarely at NVIDIA's current dominance in large-scale deployments. Okay, very ambitious. And what about Intel and the data center's CPU market? Are they breathing down AMD's neck?
Not really, not at the moment. AMD is pretty clearly the leader in x86 server CPUs right now. They keep gaining share with their 5th-gen EPYC chips.
We mentioned those industry wins earlier.
Exactly. Presence in all top 10 telcos, 9 out of 10 auto companies, 6 out of 10 energy. It shows deep penetration. Intel isn't really positioned as a close second in that specific market segment today.
Got it. Okay, so as we start to wrap this up, what are the key dates or signals we should be watching for in the next few months to see how AMD's story is unfolding?
Definitely put June 12th on your calendar. AMD has an advancing AI event. We expect, or at least hope, to get much more detail on the MI350 line then.
Okay, June 12th. What else?
Keep an eye on their Q2 '25 gross margins when they report. They've guided for a recovery back to around 54%, assuming no more big charges. That'll be telling.
Right, margin recovery. And of course, any announcements of new hyperscaler deals or other big customer wins for MI350 or MI400 beyond Oracle, that would show the momentum is continuing.
And maybe the most critical thing for the longer term.
Yeah, probably the ongoing adoption rate of ROCm among developers. If ROCm can somehow get to, say, even 5 or 10% of developer focus.
Which would still be way behind CUD, but significant growth.
Exactly. That could be a genuine game changer for AMD's competitive position in AI come 2026 and beyond. It would establish them as a truly viable alternative for a much bigger slice of the market.
So, bringing it all together, AMD's Q1 '25 was definitely a story with layers, wasn't it? Much more than just that initial positive stock reaction.
Absolutely.
We're seeing signals of strong pricing power in PCs, real momentum in AI GPU adoption beyond just one headline deal, and some smart strategic moves in a super competitive landscape.
It really underscores that when you're looking at these earnings reports, you just can't take the summary numbers at face value.
No.
You have to dig into the details, understand what's driving the growth, and also be really aware of the potential headwinds, the challenges a company is facing.
I couldn't agree more. And as you, listening, are processing all of this, maybe chew on this question, with RCM actually showing progress and these ambitious claims around MI400, what could the long-term ripple effect be on the entire AI hardware market if AMD really does manage to capture a more significant slice of that developer mindshare? It's definitely some food for thought.